All right, Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Are we ever going to get out of Ecclesiastes chapter 1? Yes. The two words most used by Charlie Brown are probably good, grief. Did you say that? You verbalized that. You worded that, mouthed that. Wow. Great minds think alike. Tonight we're talking about grief, specifically good grief. What is it? What is grief? Well, let me simplify the definition down to the lowest common denominator by saying it is a reaction to loss. Grief is a reaction to loss, and we usually think of it as a loss of another human being. Horatio Spafford, a successful Chicago attorney and active Presbyterian, faced a series of tragedies, starting with the 1871 Chicago fire that destroyed his real estate investments. Being a generous supporter of D.L. Moody, in November 1873, he sent his wife and 4 daughters on a trip to Europe, planning to join them later, hoping to assist Moody in his European ministry. Tragically, their ship, the SS Ville de Havre, probably French that I'm not pronouncing it correctly, sank after a collision, and all 4 of his daughters drowned. Grief is as naturally a part of living as breathing or eating. Some people wallow in it, and other people seem to get through it fairly quickly, while others, well, they act like they don't have it at all. But if you're a person who is prone to get attached to people or to things, there is a better than average that you're going to face it in your own life. And if you're serving God, well, it's a foregone conclusion that you're going to face it in someone else's life between now and the time that you lay down yours. So how do we deal with grief in our own lives and the lives of other people? Tonight I'm going to begin a two-part lesson, at least two-part lesson, on grief, hoping to answer that very question. But before we can delve into the remedy for grief, we must understand it. Because too much of the time we mislabel aspects of grief as something more sinister, such as just anger or denial or even depression. Therefore, this evening we're going to spend the next few moments describing what grief is, offering characteristics that you may be familiar with and others you may not have thought of before. The reason we're looking into grief like this is because the greater context of negative attitudes, you're likely going to find someone whose attitude, outlook, is due to grief. Solomon simply mentions in our text and does not go into a lot of detail about the subject, but you can see the implications of grief or sorrow being a source of negativism. If you see in verses 16 through 18 of chapter 1, I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to a great estate, and I have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I gave my heart to know wisdom and know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is vexation or striving of the spirit. For it is much wisdom, for in much wisdom is grief. And he that increases knowledge increases sorrow. And so what we find is even though Solomon's just mentioning grief at this point, we do recognize he's seeing it as a source of negativism. So how can we describe grief? Well, first let me just say that it is a process. Grief is a process. Psalm chapter 30, verse 5 says, Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Meaning that there is something that happens in the life of someone and they will grieve. And once it goes through the process, they will either stop grieving, which is more unlikely, or they will get to a point where they start over again in the future, because it is a process. And the entire process of grief can be lifelong. Psychology experts agree on the name for this process, or at least they used to, an acronym known as DABDA. I learned it in college. It stands for denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, grief is a complex process that varies for each individual, one that manifests itself in different ways, such as holding on to hope or expressing anger. Author Edgar Jackson poignantly describes grief. He says, grief is a young widow trying to raise 3 children alone. Grief is the man so filled with shocked uncertainty and confusion that he strikes out at the nearest person. Grief is a mother walking daily to a nearby cemetery to stand quietly and alone for a few minutes before going about the tasks of the day. She knows that part of her is in the cemetery, just as part of her is in her daily work. Grief is the silent, knife-like terror of sadness that comes 100 times a day when you start to speak to someone who is no longer there. Grief is the emptiness that comes when you eat alone after eating with another for many years. Grief is teaching yourself to go to bed without saying goodnight to the one that had died. Grief is the helpless wishing that things were different when you know they are not and never will be again. Grief is the whole cluster of adjustments, apprehensions, and uncertainties that strike life in its forward progress and make it difficult to redirect the energies of life. That's a pretty good sum. There's a lot of disagreement among psychologists about stages of grieving or what is considered normal. But one thing that they all agree on, and that is, it's not a one and done phenomenon. It is a process that people must get through, and grief requires time to navigate and to heal. By the way, this process is not the same for each person, which brings me to my next point, and that is grief is unique to every person. Grief is unique to every person. It's easy to sanitize grief into 5 terms that we can stick an acronym to and tell people that it's going to be okay. When you get to that last one, you're going to be fine. You just have to get to acceptance. And once you're there, well, it gets easier the next time. But for most, acceptance may be the very beginning point. They may go into a situation where they've come to the conclusion that this is going to happen. I'm going to lose my loved one. I can't get away from it. I can't deny it. I must accept it. And so when that person dies, you hear him say, well, he's in better place, or she's with her loved ones now, and they're happy. And it sounds almost cold and indifferent when you talk to them because they have dealt with it so long. They've come to the place where now they are dealing with acceptance. But that does not mean they're not grieving, because acceptance is just as much a part of grieving process is anger or depression or hatred or bitterness or any of those things that come out. And there's lots of it. There's lots of them. For others, they grieve through continual outbursts of anger and hatred of the world. There may be, I have no idea what I was trying to write, but I'll try to put it this way. They may only have 2 phases of grief. They may only have 2 different areas of that they exhibit symptoms of grief in. That doesn't mean that the others don't exist for them. They may come up with something totally different. For instance, we know that people in my business, in my line of work, people get dementia because of triggers, just like people get mental illnesses because of triggers. And oftentimes, though dementia is already there, it triggers along some sort of stress. A large degree of stress can create dementia-type symptoms, such as forgetfulness. People can get to the point where they're no longer organized. They become very disorganized. People start to suffer chronic fatigue. And they snap at others for no good reason. And it looks like somebody's going through a state of dementia. And you start to wonder about them. And it could simply be grief. In fact, we all grieve differently. We understand that this is a process that you don't get over, but you get through. Learning to live with it until it gets easier. But there are no set stages for grief. Bob Niemeyer, professor emeritus in the Department of Psychology in the University of Memphis, says, "We grieve as a function of who we are, who we lose, and how we lose them," which plays a foundational role in your grieving process. So, just because you grieve differently than someone else doesn't mean something's wrong with you or wrong with them. You're just different. And as we minister, we as ministers have to recognize that all negativity is not based purely on personality traits or even the presence of sin. It may be based on grief. And this could be their way of coping. Hopefully, we're going to get some clear remedies for grief next week. But just know this, that as David Kessler says, each person's grief is as unique as their own fingerprint. Now, for the sake of brevity, and we're going to get out of here, unless y'all ask a whole bunch of questions in the next 7 minutes. I think, if I can get past this long illustration. For the sake of brevity, we're going to look at the last characteristic of grief, and that is it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. You say, wow, that sounds like Christians are out there taking advantage of the opportunity while someone's grieving. Well, it's not just that. So think about it. We minister to people who are grieving, and we grieve, and it's still the same opportunity. Flip over to the 7th chapter of Ecclesiastes and look at the first few verses. In verse 2, "It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, and the sadness of the countenance of the heart is made better," because of the sadness. For by the sadness of the countenance, the heart is made better. Boy, I get it out in a second. "The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth," or pleasure. It's interesting that Solomon has this take that he has on life. He sees all this stuff, all this experience as being vain, yet he takes a moment to give good advice. Even in vanity, he gives good advice. It's almost like it doesn't do any good to offer this advice, but I'm going to offer it to you anyway. And here, this advice seems almost counterintuitive. Why would it be better to go to a funeral home? This is what he's talking about, a house of mourning. Why would it be better to go to a funeral home than to a party? Wouldn't the party be more uplifting? He's saying it's better to go to the house of mourning because we're all going to show that we're all going to come through there at some point. We're all going to be in that 6-foot box or 7-foot box, however long it is, in that box at one point in our lives, and people are going to mourn over us. So why not go there in the process and see what it is like? That's the negative view of it. But I think what he was trying to get across was what he said in verse For, as he said, the heart of the wise man is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. I'm sorry, in verse 3, because for that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. In other words, he'll take it into his life. He will think about it. And even in verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance of the heart, for the sadness of the countenance, the heart is made better. Well, I'm going to get it out. So he's saying that you could look at it from the glass half empty part of it. When you get down to the bottom, there's no way to look but up, right? We said that a lot of times. When you find yourself at the bottom of the barrel, the bottom of your life, look up, because it's the only place to look. Can't look down anymore. You're at the bottom. But you can also look at this and say, look, I've experienced the worst. Now I can enjoy the best. If I've been through the hard times, then the not so hard times seem a lot better. But if I've never seen hard times, then even my good times will seem tough. It makes me think of how we in the United States complain about what we have or don't have. When people in other parts of the world, I've been in other parts of the world where they complain about our complaints. You Americans do not know what it's like to live in poverty. The Americans homeless Americans on the street make more money than 90% of people around the world, homeless people, by their own Medicare or their own Social Security benefits. We have so much more than other countries, yet we complain because we don't like the style of our house or the type of our house. I do. I hate traders. I absolutely hate traders. But there are people who will give their left leg for a mobile home because it's either that or a box. We have air conditioner. We complain when the air conditioner goes out. When the power goes off, we're always, maybe I'm telling you what I do. I don't know. Always on the phone. Would you please get somebody out here? Please get somebody. I'm burning up out here. It's so hot out here. It's so hot. Even tell them, I've got elderly parents that are on oxygen. They've got to have electricity. Come out here and turn my electricity back on. You got people who've never had electricity in the world. And they live in the desert. At least they get some refreshment. And at night, it's cooler in the desert than it is here. But I guess my point is that when you think about what we have, when we think about what others are experiencing, if we experience just a piece of what they're experiencing, we could go a long way. We could grow a long way. This morning, I said prior to singing a song something about when everything looks darkest, that's when we see the glory of God the brightest. When you look up at the night sky in the city, what do you see? Blackness. But when you look up at the night sky out in the country where there's no lights around, what do you see? A beautiful, beautiful heavens. The darker it is in your life, the more and the brighter you will see God. Some years ago, Alexander Wolcott described a scene in New York hospital where a grief-stricken mother sat in the hospital lounge, stunned silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had just lost her only child, and she was gazing blindly into space while the head nurse talked to her, simply because it was the duty of the head nurse, to talk in such circumstances. Did you notice the shabby little boy sitting in the hall just next to your daughter's room? The nurse asked her. No, she replied quietly. There, continued the head nurse, there is a case. That little boy's mother is a young French woman who was brought in a week ago by an ambulance from their shabby one-room apartment, which they had gravitated when they came to this country scarcely 3 months ago. They had lost all their people in the old country, and nobody And they didn't know anybody there, here. The two had only each other. Every day that lad has come and sat there from sun up to sundown in the vain hope that she would awaken and speak to him. Now he has no home at all. Mrs. Norris was listening now, so the nurse went on. 15 minutes ago, that little mother died, dropped off like a pebble into boundless ocean, and now it is my duty to go out there and tell that little fellow that at the age of 7, he's all alone in the world. The head nurse paused, then turned plaintively to Mrs. Norris. I don't suppose, she said hesitantly, I don't suppose that you would go out there and tell him for me, would you? What happened next in the next few minutes is something that you will remember forever. Mrs. Norris stood up, dried her tears, went out and put her arms around that lad and led that homeless child off to her childless home. And in the darkness, they both knew that they had become lights to each other. What am I saying? Well, I guess I'm saying that grief is an opportunity to be the hands and the feet of Jesus that we've been talking about for the last several months. Helping others as you know full well what they're going through. You might even have had to face grief yourself to find the next chapter in your life. Because that is the opportunity you would have not taken without the loss. What is that next opportunity? What is that next phase of your life? Well, only grief you can only look back at that time of grieving to find out what it was. It may have been a new family, a new relationship, a new husband, a new wife. It may be another opportunity to do something that you couldn't do before. I've heard couples who one of them was bound to the home while the other one laid there and died for years and years and years. Only to find that later in life, when that other one died, the one living, the one left, had an opportunity to do something that they couldn't have done before. Opportunities. Grief is an opportunity. I didn't tell you the end of that story about Horatio Spafford that I began with. When he was on that ship headed to England, to Wales, waiting to see his wife, he stood on that deck hour after hour, day after day, until he rejoined with his sorrowing wife. When the ship passed the approximate place where his precious daughters had drowned, Spafford received sustaining comfort from God that enabled him to write these words. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. In the sea of grief, hope floats. When all else is lost, hope remains. When darkness is closing in, hope is that faint light on the horizon saying, don't give up on living because something better is ahead. Father, we are grateful that in our worst times we see you. We see you more clearly because, God, we are not distracted by the glitz and glamour of life when it holds no hope for us. And Lord, there are going to be days when these people in this room will face much grief. Days in their lives where they lose a precious someone. God, I pray that they would remember this lesson, that they would remember this passage, that they would remember the hope that you have instilled in their lives by Jesus Christ who rose from the dead. I pray, God, that you would bless our people and help us to minister to those who are grieving. God, that we would not shrug it off and say, in a few months they'll be better. But God, we'd understand with a heart of compassion that they're going through a tough time and they need someone just to lean on, just to be there. Lord, as we leave this place, we may face opportunities to deal with that this week, and I pray, God, that you would help us to remember this. And if not, Lord, teach us so that we never forget it. Guide us to our home safely. Give us a good night's rest. Lord, thank you for the privilege of being in your house once again. In Jesus' name.